My advice as far as like when it comes to whatever it is you want to write or material you want to find or a story you want to tell or you want to do is what's a movie you want to see?
If you just truly love cinema with enough passion and you really love it, then you can't help but make a good movie.
What's the movie that we have never seen because you haven't made it? And make that movie.
I do it differently than I've done it before. I used to write all night. That was kind of my thing. Or I'd go, and during the daytime, I'd write in restaurants or something like that. And just kind of being up all night was kind of part of it, and stopping for a while and listening to music, and that was all part of it. Then somewhere around Inglourious Bastards, I started writing during the day, and I would write on my, I have a balcony outside of my bedroom that has a place for a table and stuff, and it looks up to the, I live in the Hollywood Hills, so it looks up into the greenery there, and it looks really nice. And it's really pleasant out there. And I can play music and stuff, it's so cool. And so anyway, so like say I started writing, like say around, 10, 10:30, 11, something like that. And then I write till about, 5, 6, or 7, something like that. But around that time, around 5 or 6, I'm gonna stop for the day. And what I do is I stop for the day, and then after a little bit of time of unwinding, I go into my pool, and I keep it all nice and warm there and everything. And so I just kind of hang out in the pool, and if I'm not done with something, I think, okay, what do I want to do? How do I want to go further with this? Now that I've written the first pass on it, what do I think about it? How can I make it better? Is there another element I can bring into it? Did I add too much to it? Yeah, and whatever. I'm just looking at it critically. And maybe I come up with some neat ideas. And then I get out of the pool and I make notes on those neat ideas that I came up with, like meditating about it. It actually is meditating. And then that's my work tomorrow when I get up. All right. Or if I finished a scene, okay, boom, boom, that's done. Now that part of the story is done. Now I go in the pool and I go, okay, what happens next? What's the next thing? And then I usually come up with a pretty good idea, and then I make my notes, and then that's the next day's work. And that was never really the way I did it. And that has become exclusively the way I did Inglourious Basterds and Django and this. And it truly brings a lot of joy to my life. It's a really, really lovely way to work that makes me feel really happy.
I mean, the thing is, I know as a viewer, the minute I start getting confused, I check out of the movie. Emotionally, I'm severed.
Confused?
Yeah, when I'm watching a movie and all of a sudden something starts happening where all of a sudden the storyline and everything is, it gets confusing, I don't know where I'm at when I'm watching it. I think an audience has like this, like almost like umbilical cord to the screen. And it gets severed when confusion comes in.
And therefore you lose them.
Exactly. And the thing is, most of the time, when I get confused and that's severed, it's basically because I'm not supposed to be confused. All right, that's like it's a mistake. All right. However, if you get confused, there's no problem with being momentarily confused if you feel you're in good hands. All right, and I don't think my movie, and disagree if you please, is that I don't think Pulp Fiction, for all of its goings in and around and up and down,
different stories they are,
and how it goes in this big circle, I don't think it's hard to watch at all.
No, it's not.
You have to watch it. I asked for you to watch it. You can't like put this on video and like do the New York Times crossword puzzle and watch the movie.
That's right.
All right, I'll ask you put everything down and watch it.
Give me 2 hours and whatever it is, 10 minutes.
Exactly, and then once you do that, then you can follow it. It's easy to follow.
It was almost via Patty Chayefsky that I actually realized that I actually was a pretty good writer, and maybe want to think about exploring this a little bit. Because how I actually kind of discovered writing dialogue is I used to be I'd be an actor, and I'd be in acting classes, and so part of your thing in acting classes is to drum up scenes to do. And I always wanted to do scenes from movies and stuff. And then I didn't have access to any scripts or anything like that. So I would like go and watch a movie, and then I could remember, I had a good memory, so I'd remember the scene. So I'd go home and write the scene down, and whatever I didn't remember, I would just fill in the blanks myself. Well, little by little, I would just start filling in more blanks and just kind of go off and do my own things and add to the scenes. That was my first attempt at writing dialogue with stuff like that. And I had forgotten I was doing a scene from Marty, Patty Chayefsky's Marty, in class. And I was talking to the guy I did the scene with, and he goes, I mentioned what I just mentioned. He goes, "Yeah, Quentin, you're as good as Patty Chayefsky." And I go, "What are you talking about?" "Well, remember when we did Marty, and all of a sudden there's this monologue about the fountain?" Yeah. "That's not in Marty, that's you." You gave me your handwritten version. I actually have Marty at home, and I go, there's no fountain, there's no monologue about a fountain in this scene. But it fit in perfect with the scene, and I was like, "Well, it's just as good as the Patty Chayefsky stuff." And it was him. His name was Ronnie Coleman, and when he said that, it was like the first ding, little tiny dinner bell, like the one around the side of a table, ding, ding, ding. All right, it was the first little ring that was like, maybe I should pay attention to this. Maybe I should explore this a little bit more.
And so I thought the idea, in the case of Pulp Fiction, that would be kind of cool, is to take 3 separate stories, and make them be the oldest stories in the book. Whether it be Vincent's character, the hoodlum, has to go out with the boss's lady, but don't touch her. And there's a whole history of people who have touched her and what happens. Well, we've seen that before, a zillion times. All right, in the case of the Bruce Willis story, that's the boxer supposed to throw the fight, and he doesn't, and now the mob's after him. We've seen that story a million times before. And one of the things I thought about, like the third story, was basically kind of the beginning of, at the time, of almost every Joel Silver movie, which would start off with like a couple of hitmen showing up, boom, boom. All right, you want to witness something? Witness this. And they shoot the guy, and then it cuts to Arnold Schwarzenegger walking through the forest, and eventually he's going to meet those guys. And so I thought, well, what happens if we hung out with them all night long, all day long? All right, after they've killed the guy, what happens to the rest of their day? And so it was the idea of taking these chestnuts and putting them together, and then actually having the characters kind of intertwine, and it all kind of takes place in one city, and it's an environment that they all live in, and the characters kind of know each other, but you don't know that for a while, and it was just kind of hanging out with them for those 2 days.
Your heroes are always anti-heroes. They're almost always villains.
Yeah.
I mean, your heroes are always... So it's not dark exactly, because they're kind of weirdly light villains. I mean, in terms of their happiness with villainy. But they're never, again and again and again, you wouldn't call them classic heroes. I mean, in the sense of the heroic leading man, like Frederick Zoller even.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something that you think about when you're writing?
I actually really try to have morality not even be an issue at all right, when it comes to my characters.
No, but it's so interesting. I mean...
I don't want that to have any play whatsoever. That would be me commenting on them.
Right.
That is me sticking my big nose into their lives and then their philosophies. I let them be who they are. And, my just feeling is, I just want the same rights that a novelist has. I mean, we lived through the 80s where every Hollywood movie, everyone had to be likable and everybody had to be understandable,
right.
And the test scores were like, oh, well, we didn't like him, so we got to change every goddamn thing, And I didn't make movies at that time, but I was watching them, and I said, I'm not going to make that crap. And I just want the same freedom that a novelist has. I mean, you can write a novel about a bastard, but it can be totally interesting.
My advice, as far as when it comes to whatever it is you want to write, or material you want to find, or a story you want to tell, or you want to do, is what's a movie you want to see? What is a movie that what is it you want to contribute? All right, and make it maybe just even slightly a little less about you yourself. I'm assuming most of you guys haven't made a feature yet. All right, but there's a lot of features that have been made before you. There's a whole lot of movies you could see, a whole lot of movies you could watch without you. What's the movie that we have never seen because you haven't made it? And make that movie. Make the movie that it's the reason why you're going to be doing it. All right? The truth of the matter is, good, bad, or indifferent, Reservoir Dogs didn't really exist before I did it. Heist films had been made. And you know, there's a whole story about this Hong Kong movie City on Fire. If you've ever seen City on Fire, it's very, very different from my movie. The section that they say I took, I did take from it. All right, absolutely, I took from it. All right, but it's a very different movie. They actually talked to the director, Ringo Lam. He goes, "Wow, Tarantino took the last 10 minutes of my movie, made an entire movie about it." Well, that's a fucking different movie. That's very, very different. But the point being, though, is what I had to say and my kind of idea of crime films and my idea of dialogue. You know, there was Barry Levinson and Tin Men, and there was Goodfellas, and there was all kinds. There's the David Mamet stuff. All that stuff existed. That was sort of like Reservoir Dogs, but it wasn't Reservoir Dogs. It didn't have this aesthetic that I'd been having. You know, because the thing is, I wasn't being. You know, the movies that were collecting in my head. For all the movies I saw, I never saw them. I saw a flash of them. I saw a movie that would have a scene. That would be the aesthetic that I was looking for. Or they would play a song in a movie, and that would be the kind of song that I would use, and it would have the kind of feeling that I'd want a song to have in one of my movies. Or a character would be the kind of character that I wanted to do a movie about. Not all the other characters, just one character. You know, but usually, like I said, it was a scene. It was a mood for only a little bit, or a section of the movie. But it was never the whole enchilada. It was never that aesthetic that was in my head. Was never just there. I mean, if it was just there, if 2 or 3 other people were doing it, I might not have been a filmmaker because I didn't need to get it out of my head.
And one of the director goes, "Have you done your subtext work?" No, what's that? You see, you think because you wrote it, you know everything, but you don't know everything. You've done the writer work. You haven't done the director work. You need to do your subtext work. So he's describing this whole thing to me, and I was, still pretty young at the time, and I was like, oh, wow, is that really what a director does? Wow, really? Tell me about it. And so they're telling the whole thing, and I was actually really kind of excited to go off and give this a shot. So I took, to me, what I thought was like the most obvious scene you could possibly take. I took Mr. White bringing Mr. Orange into the warehouse all by themselves. Mr. Orange, because he's a cop, is saying, please, and he's dying, please, 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 take me to the hospital. Mr. White, because he doesn't know he's a cop, is like, no, 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 I can't take you to the hospital. You can just hang in there. So, I could ask anybody in this theater here, what does that scene mean if you've seen the movie? And you could tell me. But when you actually start putting pen to paper, it becomes a different thing. It actually, a lot of stuff opened up that I hadn't thought about before, because subtext is getting beyond what's the obvious there. And so I wrote down, what does Mr. White want from this scene more than anything else in the world? What does Mr. Orange want from this scene more than anything else in this world? And what do I, as the filmmaker, want the audience to take away from this scene more than anything else in the world? And just even writing the obvious shit about Mr. Orange is dying and he wants to be taken to a hospital, all of a sudden, the more I wrote, the more I realized that the movie was a father-son story. And that Mr. White was functioning as Mr. Orange's father at that moment. And Mr. Orange was functioning as a son, but he was a son who'd betrayed his father. But his father doesn't know about the betrayal. And he's trying to hide it from him as long as he can, because the guilt is really starting to hit him. Yet, Mr. White has faith in Joe Cabot, Lawrence Turney, who is his metaphorical father in this situation. And what does he keep saying? Just don't worry about it. Wait for Joe to get here. When Joe gets here, you're all going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. And what happens when Joe gets there? He kills Mr. Orange. And then actually Mr. White has to choose between his father, his spiritual father, his metaphorical father, and his metaphorical son. And naturally he chooses his metaphorical son, and he's wrong. But he's wrong for all the right reasons. That was pretty heavy.
That's fascinating.
And that was pretty
pretty heavy. And me as a student at Sundance was in my little bungalow in the snow. And I'm writing all that. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. That's deep. There's a lot of there. Well, I'm glad to know my work has such depth. I'm glad to know that the roots extend that far deep, but I never want to know about those roots again because I know they're there. And I don't want to tell a father-son story. I want to tell my gangster story. I want to tell my heist story. The father-son story will take care of itself. The father-son story is for everybody else who invests in it. And the father-son story is there because it is deeper than just a robbery. But me, I want to deal with the robbery and let the other guy who's doing the writing, who knows about the roots, deal with the roots.
Unbelievable.
Most of the characters in the movie are given choices to make, and they make the choices that they make, and they pay the price or the consequences, or they live to tell the tale because of those choices. And we actually see it happen all 3 different times in the movie. And but it's funny though, if you just take that for what it is. If you just look at the case of John Travolta and Sam Jackson, it would suggest, well, okay, Sam Jackson made the good choice, made the right choice, and thus he prospers, and John Travolta pays no attention to it, and thus we know he dies. But you have to think about Bruce Willis's choice that happens in this movie, because he actually makes 2 choices. One, he makes a choice to do a very unhonorable thing. You know, he actually makes the deal with Marcellus Wallace to throw the fight. He doesn't have to. Marcellus doesn't say, throw the fight or you're dead. He makes it for money. And he takes the money and he screws Marcellus with it. But he actually ends up living to tell the tale, right? Because he actually does make a moral choice later when he goes back to save Marcellus. But he's still starting from a very bad place, and he actually ends up prospering, for it. But again, he does make a moral choice that he doesn't have to. But if he had left, I'm just thinking about it now. If he had left the pawn shop and just let Marcellus be buggered, if he just left that, would he still get out of town? With Fabian, would he still make it to Tennessee? Would he still have all the money and everything like that? Now he'd be looking over his shoulder. Right now he's not looking over his shoulder because he did the moral thing. He actually got away with it.
When I write a character that doesn't have a lot, that doesn't say a lot, doesn't get it across a lot in dialogue, and doesn't have that many story beats, where these giant, the giant reveals are happening, I tend to write those characters more prose-like. I tend to write them a little bit more like a novel, all right? And I'm putting a lot of stuff in there that you guys, the audience, is never going to see, and you're never supposed to see it, all right? But it's there for the reader. I want the person who's reading the script to have a good time and to be engaged in the story. And there's stuff for the reader that's meant for them, and it's not meant for you. And there's but it's meant for the actor. And so it gives the actor like a sense of who this guy is. And more than most other scripts, like I said, I did a lot of exploring with this, but writing stuff that doesn't even quite make the script. Like, just to give you an idea, I wrote a whole prose chapter of exactly what happened on the boat. I written like the first chapter of a book. All right, it was called Misadventure. And there you find out exactly what happened. I'm not telling you guys, all right, but Brad knows, And it was all done as prose, and it was like a little chapter of a book, and he got a real sense of it. All right. In the case of describing Rick Dalton's career, for example, and the career, his filmography, his situation that he had, the situation that he got to, the situation he has now, I wrote that as not just like a chapter in a book. I wrote it like a chapter of a film book. Like a film book about Rick Dalton. It was called The Man Who Would Be McQueen. And frankly, to tell you the truth, it was when Leo read that is what finally pushed him over the edge to say yes.
to the character, because then he had a sense of it. And it was literally written as if, like Tim Lucas in Video Watchdog has written like a chapter on the career of Rick Dalton.
You don't have to know how to make a movie. If you truly love cinema with all your heart and with enough passion, you can't help but make a good movie. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to know a lens, a 40 and a 50 and a fuck all that shit. Crossing the line, none of that shit's important. If you just truly love cinema with enough passion and you really love it, then you can't help but make a good movie.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for watching. We really dug deep to find you only the most valuable screenwriting piece of advice from Quentin Tarantino. And we found a lot of hidden gems from this screenwriting mastermind. So we made another video with an additional 5 screenwriting tips from Quentin Tarantino for our Patreon supporters. The link to our Patreon page is in the description below. Let us know in the comments from what screenwriter or film you want to learn screenwriting lessons in our future videos. Keep writing and see you in the next video.